which you cannot do on the guitar because it's in a grid format. Therefore, bringing it back, saying the distance in notes is really helpful. All right, so then if I go two half steps up, what would that be then? That would be what we call usually a major second. So we might have a capital M. By the way, this one was amber. The 1 was an amber. 2, we're going to call that chartreuse. So that means a 2 note away major second would be chartreuse. Why do we call it a major second? Because we're comparing everything to the major scale. So remember that from a normal interval convention, they only have like a major second is what you would list. There's really kind of 3 measurements that are happening here. The second represents the scale degree, but the scale degree forces you to rename where you're measuring from as the first point, right? Which is a problem. So if you take 1 back from it, that would be the modal distance, or the number of steps up, modal half steps from that point. And then the 2 that I'm adding here up front represents the notes, which is the actual distance that you really want. That's the main thing that we're looking for. And the M represents whether or not it's in the major scale. So if it's a capital M, that means it's an interval that's represented by the formula of the major scale that we basically looked at. Now note that M, whether it's in the major scale, kind of causes problems because we're basically looking at all of these intervals as though the major scale is somehow super important, as though it's different. And it's not, like mathematically or just logically, from any of the other modes, right? So that's the problem with the convention, that it's just mathematically, just logically, it doesn't quite make sense, right? It would make more sense to just memorize the distances from each of the 7 points in the collections of notes, right? So it is what it is. So now we've got 3. 3 is going to be the lime color, 3 half steps. We call that a minor third. I would call it a 3 note away minor third, right? Because I want to know the distance in notes. But if it's always going to be lime if it's 3 notes away. If it's 4 away, we call that a 4 note away major third. Now, obviously, the major third is in the major scale. The minor third is, of course, not in the major scale. You would think they called it minor because it would then be in the minor scale. But that's not always true. That what happened is they called everything that's major the interval that's in the major scale, and then everything that's minor, they just kind of made it minor. We know that's true because this 1 note away minor second is not in the main minor. It's not in the Aeolian mode, right? It's still a minor, but it's not in the minor scale. Why is it a minor? Because it didn't fit in the major scale. All they're doing is fitting it into the major scale and saying this isn't in the major scale, so we dumped it into the minor, basically, right? And so 5, if you go a distance of 5 half steps, we call that a perfect fourth. And you're going to say, well, what happened to your story here? You said that they made all the ones major that were in the major scale. And it's like, well, yes, except the perfect fourth, because they started like with the perfect fifth down here, which was like the perfect, ratio. And so that's what they started with, and they wanted to give it a special name. So it was the perfect fifth. So now you have that's even elevated above the major scale. So major scale of hierarchy is better than any other scale, apparently, according to the way this kind of built in history. And then the perfect fifth is the perfect, even higher up perfectness than the major scale. So we had to do something with that. And the inverse of the perfect fifth is the perfect fourth. So it wouldn't make sense to have a perfect fifth unless you also make the inverse perfect, right? So then now you have a perfect fourth. But from a logistical standpoint, it basically means that distance of a 5 note away perfect fourth is going to be aqua for us, and it's a stable distance, so it's going to be in most of the modal distances, no matter which point you start from, is the bottom line. Then if you go a distance of 6, that's the crazy distance. That's the half distance, halfway on the clock. We call that a tritone. Oftentimes it's a diminished fifth. It might be an augmented fourth, depending on if you're in the Locrian mode or the Lydian mode, I believe. Any case, it's a 6 note away diminished fifth, and then the 7, and that's going to be electric sky. So that one is crazy. Watch out, you'll get electrocuted from a 6-note distance. It's going to sound very tritony. And then the 7-note away is going to be azure, and that's going to be a perfect fifth. So it's a 7-note away perfect fifth. That's like the baseline interval that Pythagoras discovered and was amazed by. And then we have the 8-note away distance, which is an 8-note away minor 6. We're going to say that's grape. So 8 notes away is grape. And that's, again, a minor. So that means it's not in the major scale. So we're back to the major minor business. By the way, why did this tritone not get called a minor fifth? Because they made this one not a major 6 because it had to be perfect, which means they didn't have we couldn't call it minor because there's no major. So then they had to make up this diminished, right? It got all messed up there too. See, that doesn't seem like the most efficient system, right? And then but this one, if you go 9 notes away, it's a major 6. So that's a 9-note away major 6. That's going to be orchid. And now we're back to the major. So the one that doesn't fit is going to be the minor. So now we're back to the system that works. So then if we go 10 notes away, that's going to be fuchsia. And we're going to call that a minor 7. So it's a 10-note away minor 7, which once again is not in the major scale and is in the minor scale. And then we have an 11-note away, which is in the major scale, major 7. It's an 11-note away major 7, which we're going to say is punch colored. All right. So then what I think would make more sense, I'm going to try to open these up at the same time, would be what I think would make more sense. Not that anyone's asking me, but I like to give my opinion about things. Whether I'm asked or if you ask for permission, you know how the saying goes, then no one will let you talk about stuff. So it's better. So let's say, stop talking about stuff. I will talk about things if I want to talk about. Okay. So then we're gonna say, if you go from the Ionian, it would make more sense to say, look, let's list out all the distances from the point we're going from, because the perfect and the majors and minor names aren't really helping us out much here. Okay, so these things, let's just name the point to the point that we're going in, because all the relative positions are the same for all 12 collections of 7 notes. So in other words, if I'm on the Ionian and I don't go anywhere to the Ionian, I call that an II modal range or a 1-1 modal range from a Nashville number system. And I'd like to say it's a 0 note away, because I want the 0 notes, right? I want to add that from the Ionian node, and it's 0 modal half steps, meaning in the collection of notes, I haven't moved any distance, right? Which would be equivalent to a 0 note away perfect first. If it's the Dorian, I'd say I went from the Dorian to the Dorian. So this is all going to be the same color of flame, right? But if I went to the Dorian, I'm going to call it a 2-2 modal range. So it's the same thing. I could say hey, look, it's a 0 note away, zeroist modal half step. But I'd like to name the node that it's a 0 note away from, right? That would make it more better than saying it's a P or an M, which isn't giving me any actual information if I knew the distance. I want the distance, not the P or the M. The distance is going to give me the information. What would be useful if you're going to add something other than just distance would be the point that you started from a measuring standpoint, you know? Like if you're measuring something and you're saying how far you're going, and you want to add something, maybe the starting point of where you are measuring from would be the most useful thing. That's what I feel like. So then if I went from the Phrygian, it would be a PP or 3-3 modal range. In other words, we're going 0 notes away from the Phrygian node, 0 modal half steps. It's still going to be flame. If I'm on the next one, a YY, that's going to be a 4-4 modal range. It's going to be a 0 note away from the Lydian, 0 modal half step. And then an XX, Mixolydian to Mixolydian, once again, 0 notes away from the Mixolydian node, 0 modal half steps. An AA, a 6-6, I didn't go anywhere, 0 notes away from the Aeolian, 0 modal half steps. And then finally an NN, the same. So it looks like we've added a lot more distances, but we didn't, because you could shorten it. You could just say, look, it's 0 notes away, and it's 0 modal half steps from somewhere. But but it would be better to say where it's from. That will give you the information. So what if I say we go up 1? If I go up 1, right, 1 step from the perspective of the Ionian, we're going to land in the ocean. We land in the Ionian Ocean. So this whole strip is still going to be amber, but from the perspective of the Ionian, I go from I to I plus, or the Ionian Ocean. In other words, I have a modal range of 1 to 1.5 because I'm in the ocean, the 0.5 representing that. The distance is going to be 1 node away from the Ionian, which is a 0.5 modal half step, meaning I'm taking a step into the ocean. I'm not getting to another continent. I'm not getting to another note. I'm hitting the note that's one of the 5 notes that aren't in our thing. But if I go from the Dorian, it's going to be a DD plus, meaning I'm going from the Dorian 1 note up to the Dorian Ocean. It's going to be a 2.5 modal range, meaning I go 1 half step up from the Dorian, which once again lands me in the ocean, because even though this would be like a minor second, it's not in the Dorian mode because most don't have it. So then if it's the Phrygian, it's going to be a PY modal range or a 3-4 modal range. In other words, if I go 1 step up from the Phrygian, I do land on a continent. So that's going to be 1 full modal half step up. So see, I'm measuring it by the distance or how far it is from the continent that I'm on, rather than measuring everything as though it's being measured from like the major scale, which isn't really helpful if I'm not measuring it from the major scale. I already have the distances I need, right? Meaning I'm measuring it in modal half steps and notes. So I don't really need to also compare it to the major scale, right? Because the only reason, anyway, so it's a YY modal range, Lydian, so it's a YY plus, meaning it's a 4 to a 4.5, landing us in the Lydian Ocean, meaning it's going to be 1 node away from the Lydian. It's going to be 0.5 modal half steps landing us in the ocean. It's an XX modal range plus, or an XX plus modal range, a 5.5 modal range, meaning if I start on the Mixolydian and go 1 note up, I land in the Mixolydian Ocean. Same with the Aeolian. It's going to land me in the Aeolian Ocean, but it's in the Locrian does have that 1. So it would be an NI modal range. If you start on the Locrian, 7-1 modal range, meaning it would be 1 node away from the Locrian node, which would be a first modal half step, which once again is there. All right, what if we go another one down? If I go next, this is going to be 2 steps up. We're going to call that chartreuse. I don't care, where we started from with the color system. It's going to be 2 steps up no matter what. Chartreuse is 2 steps up. If you start on the Ionian, you end up from the Ionian to the Dorian, right? 1 to the 2. So, which is 2 half steps up, but it's only 1 modal half step up. So that's going to be a 1-2 modal range. It's going to be a 2 modal half step from the Ionian. A 2 half step from the Ionian, 1 modal half step up. If I start on the Dorian, it's going to be a D to the P. That's going to be a 2-3 modal range, a 2 node away from the Dorian first modal half step, which would be the second scale degree. If we thought about it by scale degree, a PY, it's going to be a PY plus, meaning it's going to land us in the Lydian Ocean if we start and go the same distance from the Phrygian. So it's going to be a 3 to a 4.5 modal range. It's going to be a 2 node away from the Phrygian, 1.5, landing us in the ocean. If I start on the Lydian, it's going to be a YX modal range, a 4-5 modal range, meaning 2 notes away from the Lydian first modal half step, which would be the second scale degree. For the Mixolydian, it would be an XA modal range, a 5-6 modal range, 2 note away from the Mixolydian first modal half step. From the Aeolian, AN modal range, 6-7 modal range, 2 notes away from the Aeolian first modal half step, which would be the second scale degree, and the Locrian, it lands us in the ocean. If we go 2 steps up from the Locrian, 2 to the Ionian plus, we land in the Ionian Ocean, 7 to the 1.5 modal range, meaning we go up 2 notes up from the Locrian 1.5 modal half steps. So let's go up to the next one. If we go 3 up, so if we go 3 up and we measure them, these are all going to be lime for our color, standing for 3 half steps. But if we go from the Ionian and we go 3 up, it's going to land us in the ocean. It's going to be an Ionian to the D plus or the Dorian ocean, 1 to the 2.5 modal range, meaning we're going 3 notes up from the Ionian, which is 1.5 modal half steps up, which lands us in the ocean, which would be like a 2.5 scale degree if you had 0.5s, but we don't. So it would be 3, right? It's a minor third. So it's a dy from the Dorian. So the Dorian is a minor mode, so we would expect it to land us in a continent if we go 3 notes up from it. So it would be a dy modal range if I go 3 notes up, a 2-4 modal range, meaning I go 3 notes up from the Dorian, which would be 2 modal half steps, or the third scale degree, it would be a minor third. So the Phrygian, also a minor mode, so it would be a